Alright, we are no micing this nonsense because I don't have a microphone. Let's go. Hello, welcome back to my channel, me the Color Queen. It has been centuries since I have sat down and made a video. And there's reasons for it. It's, you know, I have a script. First time ever, I have a script. I'll be referring to it on my little laptop here. Did not mean to be away for so long. There were 5 things that happened, including number 1, I got a job. That job takes up a lot of my life. It's just how it is. The second thing that happened, which I did post about on my channel, was that I got married. Lovely, awesome, married my best friend. You've seen him in the channel. The third reason was that I moved. Twice. The first time is that I moved from my family home, which you might have remembered from like old videos of like all the posters on the wall and things like that, to an apartment, which I do have some videos that feature the apartment. And now I am here. I then proceeded to have the worst burnout that lasted about 3 years. And then I got diagnosed with ADHD. So, wonderful. Who would have thought? This is the first video that you will see before you will witness lots of very old videos, because even though I was not posting to this channel, I was still filming. I was still taking bits and pieces from the cons that I went to, from the projects that I was making. I still filmed all of that. My poor little laptop here can only handle about 1 or 2 videos at a time and not 11. This ADHD diagnosis is really just coming together, isn't it? All of the videos that you will see after this particular one are going to be old until further notice. I'll probably put like a little disclaimer in front of each one that's like, hey, this is an old one. This was filmed in like 2022, 2021, something like that. So that way you have an idea of the timeline that I roughly got things done. I finished a lot of things and I'm very excited to share them with you. The first one that I know is going to come up after this video is my Lisa work log from Genshin Impact. And I'm very proud of this costume. I hope that you enjoy it. I've done a photo shoot with it. I've taken it to a lot of cons since I finished it, and I'm just really excited to show you the process that I used whenever I made it. I also plan on doing more booktube-like things, just because I want to yap about books. I used to do this thing called Adventures of the Month. They were the least watched things on my channel, but I really liked doing them. But what was hindering me the most was that I was trying to focus on too many things at once, which again, really not beating these ADHD diagnosis things, am I? And so I decided to switch my focus to just books. That way I can kind of at least have a little bit of a foothold in the booktube sort of community here. My brand is now cosplay and books. So there we go. I plan on updating all of my like book reading and things every 2 months. So the next booktube sort of video that you'll see is probably at the end of February. You'll be seeing old videos in combination with these new booktube videos until I get caught up with all of my cosplay stuff. Now on to the books of 2024. I read 30 books this year, which was wild for me. During the burnout that I mentioned before, I had only read about 20 books during that whole year of like 2020 to like 2023, which is not me at all. I mean, I was an English major in my undergrad, like I'm a booky person. And so going from 20-ish books from 2020 to 2023 to 30 in 2024 alone was a big deal. My average rating for the books that I read was about 4 stars. I don't think I'm going to be sharing my star ratings for any of the books that I really talk about because my feelings change a lot, very capricious, if you will. It's also why I don't really use Goodreads, because number 1, that website is terrible to navigate, and number 2, it just feels too permanent to just have those star ratings out there. So, all right, so now on to the actual book time. Let me pull it up. So for January, I read 6 books, and I'll go through them right now. The first one was by Stephanie Garber, and it was Once Upon a Broken Heart. I had started reading this book series with a friend back in October of 2023. We were supposed to be buddy reading together, and I didn't finish it until January, so if my friend is watching this, I am so sorry. I really enjoyed it. It's a young adult fantasy. The plot was pretty easy to follow. I remember getting frustrated with the main character though. It's been a little too long since I have read this series because it's been a year, but I remember feeling frustrated with the character sometimes because I felt like she was making lots of dumb choices that I would not make. But all in all, I did enjoy reading it. I have a physical copy that I've decided to keep. And then of course I read the second book, The Ballad of Never After, right after that. And again, it was really good, just a good way to escape from the troubles of the world. The only thing that I did not like was the ending. It disappointed me because I could see what was coming, but I did really enjoy the sweet and fluffy moments according to my notes here. And of course, I rounded it off with the last book in the series, A Curse for True Love, and this one actually kind of disappointed me. There's just so much build up to this certain part of the story, and when we finally got there, it just did not live up to the hype, and so I was kind of disappointed in this trilogy in the end. The first one just started out so strong, the second one started falling into like tropey categories, and then the third one was like, why was this here? Why did this happen? Take that with what you will. Again, it's been like a year since I've actually read it, and seeing that I don't remember a lot of it either shows that I have very poor memory, or also the fact that it just was not very memorable. So moving on. The next one that I read in January was This Is How You Lose the Time War. And I cannot tell you a single thing of why I enjoyed it so much. I just really liked it. I think it was because of like the English scholar in me. I really enjoyed this type of prose and the way that these two characters are right back and forth to each other, and I was watching them like fall in love, and it was really neat. I really enjoyed it. The vibes were just immaculate. I like the figurative language. I feel like if I read it again, I would probably understand it even more than I did. I think I read it in like one sitting as well because it was kind of short. The next one that I read in January was The Color Purple by Alice Walker, and oh my goodness, this book destroyed me on a very emotional level. I was crying through so much of this. There are a couple of like trigger warnings, there's a lot of abuse, there's a lot of assault. Other than that, it was very touching. It ripped my heart into tiny pieces, and unfortunately the book that I was reading from fell apart in my hands because I did not realize that it was a first edition paperback. So like that book was old and I was mean. So oops. If you would like your heart to get ripped out of your chest and then stamped into a bajillion little pieces, but also have this sliver of hope throughout all of it, yeah, it'd be for you. The last one that I read in January was Small Favors by Erin. This one was a little bit of a slow start. I remember this being a slow start. I originally started reading this with a book club that I'm involved in, and then I proceeded to fall off of reading it again in the 2023, but then I ended up finishing it in 2024. It would have been better if it did not take 100 pages to actually get good. I'm not exaggerating, it was like exactly 100 pages before it was like, this is really interesting, this is awesome, I'm going to really enjoy this. If you don't mind a slow start, there you go. But usually I DNF books if they're still not hanging my interest at about 100 pages, but like right at page 100 it started, something happened, and it was really interesting. It had very creepy vibes. I enjoyed that aspect of it. I could see me coming back to this book maybe in like the fall or the winter time. Okay, so that was January. In February I read 3 books. First one that I read in February was Beowulf. Of course I read Beowulf. English person, man. I like Beowulf. You should read it if you have not ever read it before. I do recommend though maybe listening to it in like an audiobook format. It's translated from Old English. I read a mass market paperback version, did not like how it was formatted, so I donated my copy. Next one is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I know, again, English person, had never read Pride and Prejudice until last year. Loved it. I will say this was a 5-star one. So like I will disclose this was a 5-star one. I'm going to keep going back to this one over and over and over again because it's just that good. The last book that I read in February was Peter Pan by J.J.A. Barrie. I have never read Peter Pan. I was obsessed with the Disney movie when I was a kid. I really liked the live action with like the really handsome guy. I'll probably put like a picture somewhere over here. You'll know what I'm talking about. But I never read the story, so I read the story. Now I will disclose there are some very problematic images of the Native Americans in this story, but other than that, it was a children's book. I had a lot of fun with it. I would have liked it a lot as a kid, and I'm kind of sad that I didn't read it as a kid. In March, I read exactly one book. Wait, that isn't correct. I read 2. It says that I have 2 here. I lied on my script. So in March, I read 2 books. The next book that I read was How to ADHD, An Insider's Guide to Working with Your Brain by Jessica McCabe. This book helped me so much when it came to understanding my diagnosis and tips and tricks on how to handle my brain. I'm going to return to this book forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. I took so many annotations, I took so many highlights, so if anyone ever wants to borrow this book, I do not apologize for any of the annotations that I made in that book. It was extremely helpful if you too have the spicy ADHD brain. I highly recommend checking it out. The next one is A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. I read this in one sitting, and I remember it was at night, and I just devoured it all right before bed. It just felt like a nice little cozy hug. I loved it. I loved it so much. And then I learned that there was a sequel, and I actually held off on reading the sequel until this year, so whenever I do my book wrap up of January and February, you will see this book in there. If you just want a nice little book about someone who produces tea for people and listens to their problems, go on a little journey to find themselves, and also befriend a robot, that's for you. It just hit the heart. It just hit the heart in a really nice way. April, we're moving right along. I read 2 books in this time. The first one was The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. This was immaculate. I, at first, was not very sure of this fantasy, but oh my goodness, like I went on a journey. But the thing is that there's a lot of very hard topics. After I read this book, I needed a little palate cleanser, but I do highly recommend this book. Does it live up to the hype? I think so. Just keep in mind there are lots of themes of war, so if that bothers you, there's your warning. The magic system has to do with shamanism, and so I thought that was really interesting. I hadn't seen that in a while. Again, I thought it was really interesting. The second book that I read in April was The Stolen Heir by Holly Black. I am a big Book of the Heir trilogy person. I loved that whole trilogy. Read The Stolen Heir, loved it, loved the new characters' voice. My notes in here say she ate no notes, so I really can't say anything else about it other than the fact that the vibes were immaculate and I enjoyed it. Which leads us into May, in which I read 2 books there as well. And that is when I read The Prisoner's Throne, which is the second book to this duology. This one I liked a little less. I know that because it says in my notes. The ending is kind of what made it drop off for me. I didn't really like the way that the ending kind of dragged. It felt like it was dragging a little bit. Because it was dragging, it wasn't as satisfying as I would have liked it to be. But other than that, I really liked seeing the different perspective of another character that is near and dear to the series and this world. Then the second book that I read in May, of course, was The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. I just like to revisit Gatsby every so often. I can't say anything. I still really like it. I know the author is just insane, but it's a classic for a reason. I like it. It's good. I can't say anything else. You know, for an English person, you would think that like I could talk about these things in a more in-depth manner. Please cut me some slack. This is my first video back on the channel and I'm a little bit rusty. In June, I read 1 book. And that is when I proceeded to have a little bit of a slump because the book was not that great. It did not impress me very much. It was called The Thorns Remain by J.J.A. Harwood. It was a young adult fantasy and I wanted to like it. I wanted to like it so bad. But the way that it was structured into like 5 different sections, I understood why it was structured that way. It has to do with the narrative. I didn't like it because it took forever and I really need those dopamine boosts. So I had to read it in like big chunks of time, and because it took so much time to get through it, it just didn't really do it for me. However, I really liked the way the fairies in this novel were represented. I thought they were very creepy, very eerie. I like the mix of creepy, eerie, and also cunning, but also beautiful. That was like the only thing that kind of kept me reading, but everything else was just, it just kind of fell flat for me. Also, it was set in early 1900s, so that was also really interesting. But again, execution just did not hit it for me. I wanted to really like it, but unfortunately it was a bit of a flop. I read 3 books in July, and one of them I forgot to write down when I actually finished it, which is really funny because it's another ADHD book. So in true ADHD fashion, I forgot to write the date I finished it. It was probably somewhere in July because I remember taking a break from after reading The Thorns Remain because I was just like, ugh. And this is ADHD for Smart A Women. I don't swear. How to Fall in Love with Your Neurodivergent Brain by Tracy Otsuka. Hopefully I said that right. And again, this was a 5-star. I will never apologize for my annotations in this book. No notes, she ate. I loved it so much. I have so many annotations, so many notes, so many highlights. Again, really, really helpful with understanding my brain. So if you're looking for something that will help you understand your brain a little bit better, that one, highly recommend. The next one that I read in July was A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. I really enjoyed this as well. It was very different. It was a very like a dark sort of fantasy. I loved how quirky it was as well. It just felt very neurodivergent coded to me in particular, just because of the way that people would just dump information from time to time. If you're not an information dumper, you might not like it very much, but if you are an information dumper that just goes like, here it is, you might enjoy it. It just made me think of all of the ways that I usually communicate with people about things. So it's like, well, if you don't know about this, here it is, and just proceed to dump about everything. So really enjoyed it. I bought the second book, have not read it yet. The third one that I read in July was Powerful Teaching, Unleash the Science of Learning. This was a very average book. It was kind of a chore to get through because it was very jargon heavy, and I don't remember jargon very well. I did like the ideas that they were presenting. And then I proceeded to read nothing in August. I also started going to grad school, so that's another thing that I forgot to mention. In September, I read one book. It was by Frederick Douglass, and it's called The Heroic Slave. It is the only fiction piece that he ever wrote, and it was very interesting, kind of quirky. I enjoyed reading it as I did. It was very serious, but also unserious at the same time. It just had some really interesting commentary about the slave narrative and what slave narratives were going around at this time. And in case you were wondering, yes, I did read this for a graduate class, but I really enjoyed it. I kept the book. In October, I only read one book again, and it was My Bondage and My Freedom, again by Frederick Douglass. My first semester of graduate school was Frederick Douglass, essentially. I loved this autobiography. It made me laugh, it made me cry, it made me feel everything all at once. I highly recommend checking out this autobiography if you want to learn more about what it was like being a slave, and also what it was like being a freed person, which, again, all of those struggles, just cannot imagine. Highly recommend checking this out. Next, what month are we in now? November! Yay, I read 2 in November. I read the Odyssey. I revisited the Odyssey, and it's because I got really, really into Epic the Musical. Does that surprise anyone? No, it doesn't. I had a great time. If you want to go and you want to peruse that, go right ahead. The version that I read had written it in prose form. So I do want to read the epic poem version of this that's translated by Emily Wilson. I've heard that it's really, really good, and so I want to try that next at some point. Maybe I will do it at some point during 2025. Not sure. The next book that I read in November was The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux. I read it on the Kindle. This is so unserious. Like, you would think that the whole Broadway production and the movie production, all of that would make you think that it was a very like serious, dramatic sort of story. No, the book is so unserious all the time. The narrator is like, but wait, there's more. And I could not take it seriously. I was laughing a lot. I highlighted a lot of stuff in my Kindle. Without giving any spoilers, there is a trapdoor ex machina at some point. Just every time these characters are in some sort of sticky situation, they always bring in a trapdoor. And I'm like, what? Trapdoor here to save the day. Love to see it. If you like the movie or Broadway production like I do, I recommend giving the book a try, just so you can have the silly goofy laughs. And then for December, I decided to read everything. The first one that I finished was A Fragile Enchantment by Alison Saft. And again, I read this with a book club that I'm a part of. It was good. I enjoyed it. I wanted to keep it afterwards when I was done with it. I really liked the magic in which the protagonist was able to like weave magic into clothes, and that's how they were able to feel certain ways about items or situations. Oh, I liked how it was kind of in this Regency sort of era where you go into season, and so you're like presenting yourself to the court as like eligible for marriage and things like that. And there were also underpinnings of some contentions between countries and like people. I thought it was very interesting, but it was very romance based. I wish I would have seen a little more development in the magic system, and I wish I had seen a little more development in like the background of the war that might be impending and that sort of thing, the political intrigue, if you will. It's kind of a shame. I wanted to see more of it. I thought it was a really cool idea. The next one that I read was The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. I cannot tell you a single thing about this book other than the fact that the vibes were immaculate, and I'm going to be reading it again. My notes say, I cannot tell you a single thing about the alien species and only give the roughest of plot summaries, but the vibes were immaculate. The humor in this book was top-notch. It is what I aspire to have in my own writing and in my own stories. It's like, if I could be as funny as this, then I'm set. It'd be great. The next thing that I read was An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. Again, vibes immaculate. It was so funny. According to my notes, I ate it in 2 days. It was very straightforward. You didn't really have to think very much about the plot or where it was going. Very, very silly. Silly, goofy. And then I put also the teapot. If you know, you know. The next thing that I read, which I will put a warning up here, problematic author, incoming. I read Coraline for the first time. I had never read it before. I would have liked it if I was in middle school, and I'm not really going to dwell on this any longer. Next, I read The Nightmare Before Christmas by Sarah Rush. This is a romantasy, and I read it in 1 day. I bought it on Christmas, and I read it all day. It was junk food. I just gotta let you know, it was junk food. I'm not really a spicy gal myself, so whenever I do read something that has a little bit of spice in it, I'm like, But it's also very charming and very unserious, and I love the protagonist's unreliable voice. It was just silly goofy, did not take itself very seriously at all, and I enjoy just unserious things from time to time. The next one that I read shortly after that was The Book of Unknown Americans by Cristina Enriquez. This is a book that just talks about immigrants and the lives of immigrant Americans as they come to America to looking for a better life. This book in particular had me baby crying at the end. And so I was like up at 2 a.m. finishing this book, and when I finished it, I texted my friend who had gifted me this book to read. And I was like, how dare you? You have destroyed my soul. I love it. What is the next one that you have for me? And so she has given me another book to read that hopefully crushes my soul just as much as this one did. I highly, highly recommend reading it, especially now with like just what's going on in America at the minute. The last book that I read for 2024 is The Awakening and Other Stories by Kate Chopin. ended up the year with literary fiction, and this was a perfectly average book. The ending threw me for a loop. I was not expecting the ending at all. I actually had to like Google the end of The Awakening just to make sure that I had interpreted it correctly, and I had. I was just shocked. As you can see, I like to move my genres around a lot. I can't tell you why. I just like variety. I think if I'm stuck with the same genre for too long, I end up getting a little burnt out. That was my reading wrap up for the year. My best books for sure were the ADHD books, 100%. Pride and Prejudice, A Psalm for the Wild Built, A Deadly Education, and the Book of Unknown Americans. Like, all of those just really stuck out to me. I'm going to think about these books forever and ever and ever. The worst books, I didn't really have any. They either just made me super, super sad, maybe they just didn't really stick with me. I don't necessarily think that there is a bad book out there, but I think that just maybe because of the way that I approach literature as an English person. That is it, and I need a drink of water. So I'll post a January and February update at the end of February. It feels really good to like sit down and just talk, actually. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Be safe, and I will see you in my next video. Bye, loves. I remembered my outro. Woo!